I'm Marina, Grazier, and I run a company called the Mindfulness Exchange, which I set up about 4 years ago now from when I was working at the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, which is a centre for excellence for mindfulness research, training and teacher training. It's part of Oxford University's Department of Psychiatry, and that's also where I did my mindfulness training, so I trained as a mindfulness-based cognitive therapist there. And spun off a business to look at implementing mindfulness in the workplace, which was a project I started when I was at the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, and then it was decided that it was best set up as a separate entity, as its own business with its own brand. So I set up the company with a chap that I was working with at the time there. So we founded the Oxford Mindfulness Exchange together, and then set about developing a version of an adapted version of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for the workplace, and that's been worked on and refined over the last few years, and we now have a version that we've tested that has had some very thorough research applied to it, so it has an evidence base for its effectiveness. And I spend my time helping organisations understand why it might be worth them taking mindfulness into their organisations to get some of the benefits of this sort of training. That's a really an obvious, necessary question, of course, isn't it? There are so many ways of defining it, though. The scientists still can't come to a common definition. Even I use Mark Williams's definition because that's where I learnt my mindfulness, and I really agree with it. So that is, it's a direct knowing of what's going on from moment to moment, inside and out, without judgment. So it's about being able to be present. I guess if I was to use to describe it in a way that perhaps is a bit more helpful for workplace context, it's about showing up. It's about being attentive. It's about managing your attention and awareness, and really just being present with what's going on from moment to moment. So that means understanding, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What's going on in my body right now? And using that information to inform how I am with myself and in relationships with others. I came to mindfulness through yoga, actually. So I had never had a meditation practice. I'm not a Buddhist. I don't have any links into that world. And I had a very severe depression and breakdown, which was mostly related to work, but many other life events all came crashing in at the same time. And so when I was off long-term sick, I went to yoga classes, and I started to feel that I was getting a lot better, and I couldn't work out what was going on. How was it that I'd go into a class and I'd come out and feel completely different and grounded? And somebody mentioned mindfulness to me, and then I came to understand that it was the meditation in my yoga classes that was really helping me. So I wanted to explore that side of it. And I did an 8-week mindfulness-based cognitive therapy course in Oxford. And then I realised, this is something that's really powerful and really helpful. So I would like to carry on doing it and teach it. And I phoned up the Oxford Mindfulness Centre and got through to the lady that was doing admin in those days and said, I'd like to train to do the Masters in Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy. And she said, well, what's your experience? What are your skills? Are you a psychologist? Do you have a clinical background? I said, no, neither. And she went, well, you can't come on the master's course unless you're either a psychologist, you have a degree in psychology, or you have years of clinical experience. And I was, I think, just turned 40 then, and I thought, well, it's going to take a long time to get the clinical experience, so I better go back to school, which is what I did. I went back to university and I retrained as a psychologist. And in parallel, I had the amazing fortune of going on a training with John Kabat-Zinn, where I met Professor Mark Williams. And to cut a long story short, he asked if I would be interested in doing some work for the Oxford Mindfulness Centre, in taking their work and expanding it beyond the clinical settings into corporates and the workplace. So that's how I got involved in the Oxford Mindfulness Centre's Mindfulness in the Workplace project, that was the forerunner for the mindfulness exchange, and I wanted to train to be a teacher of MBCT because, having seen the benefits, I kind of had two choices. I either went back into the corporate world where I'd come from and had an amazing and successful career, or I did something completely different. And I decided I'd do something completely different because I wanted to go back into those organisations and help my colleagues and friends who are still struggling with the ever-growing pressures of modern working life. And I knew I had something that they won't know about, because work typically didn't give us this type of education or experience or practice. So I felt really compelled to want to go in and help others. So that's how I got into mindfulness, to help myself, but and it still helps me, of course, but my passion is to go in and help others and help people flourish in organisations by mastering their minds. Ooh, well, there's quite a few. I would say that, of course, wouldn't I? No, they kind of fall into two areas in terms of mindfulness in the workplace, which I think is where it's most appropriate that I sort of put that answer, because that's what I specialise in. So they're either in the area of stress and anxiety management. So we know in the from science, and that's why mindfulness is now on the NHS, we know that there are lots of evidence for the effectiveness of mindfulness for helping people deal with recurrent depression. And lighter versions of the mindfulness that's given in the clinical world are also helping lots of people with their general stress and anxiety. So that's one area. But the other area of benefits are around more of the positive, what I call the positive psychology. So looking at performance and productivity at work. So how can I be more creative? How can I improve my memory? And we all need memory in order to be able to problem solve and perform all of the functions we need at work. So it's not a question of how can I improve recall per se, but how can I improve my performance as a result of improving my memory. And how can I improve my relationships? We all need to have positive relationships at work. And I'm sure most people know what it feels like to have said the wrong thing at the wrong time, to have hit the send button on the email and then had to do all the repair work afterwards. If only I'd had the wherewithal to have actually been more in touch with my behaviour, with my emotions, with my thoughts. Maybe I wouldn't have quite sent the email, I've put a pause in. So the benefits fall in two areas. It's either around managing myself in the face of stress, and we all know there's plenty of that in work, whether it's coming from change management programs, from too much pressure, from long working hours, from the never-ending deluge of technology-led interruptions and actions and to-do lists and in-trays. Or it's to look at how can I enhance my performance, so how can I make myself better at what I do and more effective at what I do, and use my resources more efficiently, and be better with myself and in my relationships with others, so to improve my emotional intelligence and my emotional world. It's a bit like saying, can anyone benefit from being fit? Well, yes. So yes, we all have thoughts, we all have feelings and emotions, and we all have bodily sensations, and we can all benefit from being more in tune with those by developing the capacity to pay attention to what's going on to ourselves, inside and out, from moment to moment, without judgment, because that's all it is. It's nothing more complicated than that. It depends how you define mindfulness. There are many ways of defining it. The mindfulness that I'm trained in is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and that relies on using practices that have evolved through Eastern traditions, most specifically a form of meditation, insight meditation, that comes from, amongst others, Buddhist tradition. So there is an element of the practices, if you like, what I would call exercises, the training exercises, in terms of training our attention and awareness. But you don't have to be religious to benefit. You don't have to have a Buddhist practice. I'm not a Buddhist. That's not to say there's anything wrong with being a Buddhist. It's just that it's not a necessary condition of being able to practice mindfulness. But these are, this is wisdom and knowledge that's over 2,000 years old, and I want to honour the fact that that is the case. However, modern mindfulness training the sort that I teach is based from a scientific, evidence-informed, secular perspective. So there are no orange robes or Tibetan bells in my training courses. So you don't have to be at all religious. Well, yeah, that's what I'm dedicating my career to. Yeah, absolutely. No, we're not taught this stuff at school. Forgive any maths teachers listening, but you know, algebra really doesn't cut it. In the 21st century, increasingly, the skills, the people skills of empathy and intuition and managing my emotions are critical. We've got technology that does the rest for us now. So understanding how my mind works, the impact of that on my behaviour, how I can manage my emotions more effectively to get outcomes that are better for everybody, how I can manage my resilience in the face of more and more work. All of these things are things that you don't typically get taught. I mean, mindfulness is starting to be taught on master's courses, and it is getting into schools now through the Mindfulness in Schools programme, so it's wonderful to see all of that happening. But of course, that's for this generation of school children. The rest of us grown-ups are already in the workplace, so yeah, absolutely, companies can really benefit from this as an alternative approach to performance and productivity management as well. This is something else to put in a toolkit that can help people all round, really. Yeah. So naturally, I would ask people to consider looking at my website, which is, there'll be a link, I think, at the end of this, but which is www.mindfulness-exchange.com. In terms of books, there are many books now because mindfulness has become so popular. The one book that I continue to return to that I admire above all others is the book that I also teach from, and that's Mark Williams and Danny Penman's book, which is Mindfulness, A Practical Guide to Finding Peace in a Frantic World. And also a book that my associate has co-written, which is Mindfulness at Work for Dummies, and then soon Mindfulness for Leaders. Mindfulness for Dummies for Leaders. So they're the three, but without a doubt, what I call the Frantic World book, it's available on Amazon, and it's the best. It's 8 week self-help course, and it's brilliant. Yeah.